That morning, Frank woke up earlier than usual, and it wasn't because he had to take his battered Ford to the repair shop. Thanks to the years he spent working as an orderly at the clinic, Frank grew accustomed to getting up early and working at night. He liked helping people, and that eventually became the main factor when he chose his profession. Frank's father and grandfather were doctors, and therefore, having finished high school, the man continued the family tradition without a shadow of a doubt. The surgical department, however, was no place for the faint of heart, and Frank knew that better than anyone else. Every day, the man had to deal with a large number of sick people who were forced to go to the clinic for treatment. Transporting bedridden patients was physically demanding work, but it was even harder emotionally, since Frank couldn't help but feel the patient's fear and pain. Moreover, the man never divided sick people into the rich and poor, and always provided them with equally qualified assistance. But that day, Frank had a day off, and he intended to make the most of it. Having quickly jumped into the shower and finished breakfast, the man got into his car and headed towards the nearest car service. The old motor squeezed and coughed like an old sick horse, which could no longer pull the wagon due to its old age. "Just hang on a little, okay? We're going to get you treated," Frank said from time to time, trying to drive the car as carefully as possible. Frank was afraid that his Ford would stop in the middle of the road, because the man knew that if that were to happen, not a single force in the world would be able to make the car move, except for a tow truck, of course. To Frank's great relief, he managed to get his car to the service. Having told the mechanic about his problem, the man drove the car inside and turned off the engine. "Well, it will take about 2 hours, maybe 3. So you could take a walk, or better yet, come back at noon," said the mechanic, dressed in oiled overalls. Frank gave his Ford an affectionate pat on the hood, left the car shop, and headed for the shopping mall. He intended to kill some time there because he didn't want to go home and then come all the way back again. Frank wandered aimlessly through the shops until he got bored. Then he went out on the street and saw a booth selling pastries, so he decided to get himself a treat. Having opted for a cheeseburger and a perfectly fried chop, the man sat down on a bench and started eating. At some point, the man got distracted by reading a text on his phone, so he didn't notice when a girl of about 7 years old sat down next to him. The little girl looked at Frank's half-eaten burger with hungry eyes and patiently waited for him to notice her. "Can I finish this piece?" the girl asked quietly, unable to stop herself. Frank shuddered in surprise, since he only now noticed the girl sitting on the edge of the bench. "Yes, of course, take it, but let me buy you one more. And a cherry pie maybe? And some soda," the man suggested. The little girl nodded in agreement, and Frank hurried back to the booth. The little girl didn't wait for Frank to return and took a bite out of his burger while he was gone. Eating the delicious treat, the girl smiled at passers-by, dangling her legs cheerfully. When Frank returned, he saw that the girl had almost finished his burger. There were tears in the man's eyes when he realized that the girl was very hungry. "Here, take this. This is for you. I also got you a couple of chocolate bars. I think you'll like them," Frank said, and handed the girl a paper bag. "Thank you, sir, but I won't eat it all by myself. I'll take some of it to Gina," the little girl answered, sounding very grown up. "Gina? And who's that? And what's your name?" Frank asked in surprise. "Gina is my older sister, and my name is Molly Rogers, sir. I live with my sister," the girl answered. Frank found the girl's answer very concerning. What does that mean? Why do they live alone, and why does this little girl have to beg on the street? Something's definitely wrong here, Frank thought to himself. In the meantime, Molly said goodbye very quietly, took the paper bag, and ran down the street. Feeling that something was very off with the whole situation, Frank decided to follow the little girl and find out what was wrong. Keeping a decent distance between them, the man tried not to lose sight of the girl. Finally, Molly stopped in front of a regular house with a peeling facade and a chimney leaning to one side. Frank waited for the girl to come inside, then went to the door and knocked on it. Imagine his surprise when instead of Molly, a pale, exhausted young woman of about 25 opened the door for him. "Hello, May I help you?" the stranger asked, lowering her eyes embarrassedly. Frank hesitated for a moment, trying to find the right words, and then pulled himself together and said, "Actually, I wanted to talk to you about Molly." At that moment, the little girl appeared from behind the young woman. Without even attempting to hide her joy, Molly pointed her finger at Frank and said, "Gina, this is the man who brought me food at the booth." Only now did Frank realize that the young woman in front of him was Molly's sister. The man saw that Gina was extremely embarrassed by the fact that her younger sister was forced to beg on the street. On top of that, the woman was obviously unwell, and Frank was willing to bet that she was running a fever. As it turned out later, the man was right, and Gina really did have a cold, complicated by pneumonia. As soon as he touched the woman's hand, Frank felt that she was very, very hot. "Miss, you need to see a doctor right away. I work at a clinic in a surgical department, but that's not important. Get ready, and I'll go get my car from the repair shop," Frank said in a tone that brooked no objections. Then he winked at Molly and, without saying goodbye, went to get his car from the shop. Fortunately, the mechanic had already finished working on Frank's Ford, and its engine was running like clockwork. "Well, that's better," the man thought with a smile. Now that his car was repaired, Frank felt much more confident driving it down the city roads. Back at Gina's house, he put her and Molly in the back seat and took them to the clinic. On their way over, the young people started talking and felt a strong mutual attraction. "Molly and I are half-sisters through our mother. She died of cancer when Molly was 2 years old. The doctors did everything they could, of course. I never knew my father, and therefore I ended up having to raise my sister. Molly and I have different fathers, but both of them abandoned their families. I work as a cleaning lady in a roadside motel, always in contact with cold water and disinfectants, so I got sick," Gina said in a voice trembling from the chills she was having. It was only now that Frank realized that the woman's underage sister went out to beg on the street because she simply had no other choice. There was no one to help the sisters, and it was no one's fault what had happened. Upon arrival at the clinic, Frank took Gina to the GP's office, where patients were examined for signs of lung infections. As it turned out, the woman had an advanced form of pneumonia, which required immediate hospitalization. "What about Molly? Who will take care of her? She's still so little," Gina asked with tears in her eyes. "Don't worry, and get better soon. Molly will stay with me while you get treated. And also, don't worry about paying for anything. I'll take care of it," Frank hastened to reassure the young woman. Looking gratefully at her savior, Gina smiled shyly and waved goodbye to her little sister. "Will the men in white coats help my sister?" Molly asked. "Of course they will. Only the best doctors work here," Frank answered without any doubt in his voice. Having taken Molly to his place, the young elderly surrounded the little girl with such care that she didn't know before. Frank spent all of his free time taking the girl to play outside, and he even took her to an amusement park. Moreover, he visited Gina every day. The unfortunate young woman was recovering extremely slowly. Frank heard the doctor say that if the woman had gotten to the hospital even a couple of days later, it wouldn't have been possible to save her. Thus, thanks to the timely help of the young elderly, Gina got herself a second birthday. One day, Molly asked Frank to take her to the house to get some warm clothes. Since the man had a day off, he was happy to oblige. While Molly packed up her clothes, Frank walked from room to room, looking sadly at the shabby decorations. Suddenly, the young elderly saw a photograph of a man of about 35 standing on the table. It made him shudder. His face seemed vaguely familiar to Frank. "I've seen him before, but where?" the man thought. He showed the photograph to Molly, but the girl didn't know the man pictured in it. Gina said that her mother was very protective of this photo. The girl added, At that moment, something clicked in Frank's head. "I saw this man at the surgical department about a month ago. He's a businessman who came in for an appendectomy," the young man exclaimed. Frank always had an excellent memory, so he knew that he couldn't have been wrong. Of course, the man was much older now, but the features of his face were forever imprinted in the mind of the young elderly. Afraid of making a mistake, Frank drove Molly home and returned to the clinic where he made inquiries about the patient who'd been treated there a month ago. Thus, he found out that the man from the photo was named Albert Stone. He was the owner of a construction company whose services were in high demand not only in the city, but also beyond its borders. Having arrived at his office, Frank showed him the photo and asked if he knew Gina and Molly Rogers. The man frowned at first and then looked at the guest with interest. "I knew Amanda Rogers once upon a time. We broke up about 25 years ago. But I don't know either one of these ladies," the businessman answered. "Amanda died 5 years ago, and Gina and Molly are her daughters. Gina is 25 and Molly is 7, Frank answered. Albert Stone's face immediately changed and turned pale. 25 years ago, he was in love with Amanda Rogers and even wanted to propose to her. The woman was 12 years younger than him, and this was no obstacle for true love. However, the young couple did end up breaking up, and it was all because of Albert's wealthy parents. They never saw each other again. It was rumored that Amanda moved to another city and started a new life. Having realized that Gina might be his daughter, Albert paid the woman a visit at the hospital and talked to her about her mother. Then Gina showed the businessman a photo of her late mother, and everything fell into place. "Dear Lord, that's her. That's my Amanda," Albert exclaimed with tears in his eyes. Frank smiled and once again noted his strong intuition. The DNA tests showed that Albert Stone really was Gina's biological father. But Molly's father turned out to be a homeless alcoholic. This meant only one thing for Gina. They won't have to live below the poverty line anymore. Now they will be able to afford many things that they could only dream of before. Moreover, since Albert Stone had no children of his own, he decided to adopt Molly. Now that the sisters lived in a huge mansion on Main Street, Frank could visit them almost every day. It was hard to come up with a better gift of fate for the man. Moreover, a special kind of relationship developed between Frank and Gina from the very moment they met. The young people fell in love, and it showed in the way they treated each other. Soon, Frank and Gina announced their engagement, which both their parents and Molly were extremely happy about. Being a smart little girl, Molly knew that there would soon be more happy family in their city, which means that everyone around them would be happy too.